Let me start with Professor Gao first. Why does China seem so rattled? After all, this is an indigenous development by Indian scientists of the Defense Research and Development Organization, a 5,000 kilometer range Agni 5 missile which has multiple intended re-entry vehicle capability. Why is China getting so rattled by that? Nowhere has India said that this technology is aimed at China.
Thank you very much for having me. I disagree with your question. I think China has made protests to the Indian government for two things. One is the deployment of about 10,000 Indian troops to the disputed areas between China and India. Secondly, China protested against Prime Minister Modi to the disputed area in the eastern section of China-Indian border, which is called South Tibet by China and called as Arunachal Pradesh by India. Now, there is no dispute that the border dispute does exist, and China and India need to handle their border dispute carefully rather than provoking each other. And China believed the deployment of 10,000 troops and Prime Minister Modi's visit to Arunachal Pradesh, as India calls it, and as South Tibet, as China calls it, is highly provocative. That's the reason of the Chinese protest.
No, but the fact that this missile was tested yesterday, Prime Minister Modi went to Arunachal Pradesh on Saturday, and on the day that this missile is tested and India announces to the world that the missile has been tested, that's when China decides to make a noise about the Arunachal Pradesh visit, not on the day that it happened.
I don't think so. I think as a sovereign country, India has full right to develop its own defense weapons of all kinds. And China has no problem with that. China and India need to follow a pathway of peace with each other rather than militarization against each other or provoking each other. That's why China takes it very, as a matter of fact, the announcement of the Indian military achievements. To a certain degree, I think any significant Indian achievement is welcomed by China.
Let me ask General Hasnain, there are only 5 other countries, the P5 countries essentially, which have this MIRV technology. India now becomes the 6th. And clearly, if you have an intercontinental ballistic missile at 5,000 kilometer range and with this MIRV technology, which can carry multiple nuclear warheads, isn't the message to China, even if it is unsaid?
See, first of all, Zaka, I have a great respect for Professor Gao. He's an intellectual of great repute. And therefore, but I have to counter him in his perception here. This whole aspect of missile warfare, China has developed this capability for many years, last 20, 30 years. They have an entire arm called the Second Artillery, which is dedicated essentially to missilery. India doesn't have anything of that kind. We've got very limited missilery so far. What we are attempting to essentially do is to catch up with the rest of the world. In fact, it's a very good thing that among the bigger powers, we have also now got the capability. And this is not necessarily targeted at China. We've demonstrated our capability. Nations develop and test such equipment, such weaponry, essentially to also ascertain their own technological capability and what threshold have they been able to reach up to. If China perceives a test by India as a threat to itself, then that's China's perception. It's not necessarily India's concern about that. We should be perceiving similarly every time that China talks about missilery, the kind of things that they do over Taiwan and places like that are equally threats to us. So, but we have not been protesting about that.
But General,
I think
if I may,
it's a fair one.
This technology of MIRV, which is a missile that's with a range of 5,000 kilometers, capable of hitting Beijing, as they say, but more importantly, can carry up to 3 to 5 nuclear warheads. Isn't that more for deterrence reasons, and particularly more so because India has a no first use policy, rather than for actual deployment? It's not like this rocket is going to be deployed tomorrow at the LAC.
Absolutely, Zaka, absolutely. And we are not going to war with China, and China also knows it's not going to war with us. These are things which nations do for their protection. These are all absolutely correct. These are acts of deterrence which you do from time to time. And China is now the only one with whom we have to develop that capability. We have others around us. We live in a neighborhood which is a disturbed neighborhood. So I think China should not feel very disturbed about this, because it has developed its own capabilities over a period of time, and we have never protested about it.
Okay. No, the problem, Professor Gao, is it's not just, forget about India, China. China's behavior towards India, particularly in the last 3-4 years, that's a matter of a completely different debate altogether. India looks around the region, and Chinese behavior around the region, whether it is with Japan or with South Korea or with Vietnam or with Philippines and of course with Taiwan. What is the signal that India is supposed to derive? That here is a country which has superpower ambitions, which is trying to change the status quo and sometimes even militarily push the envelope if it came down to that. So the signal and the only meaning that India can decipher out of this is that India has to fortify its defenses, because today it is Taiwan and Philippines, tomorrow it could be India. So India is just fortifying its defenses with the test of the Agni 5.
Allow me to emphasize one thing. China is a superpower in the world. China is one of the 5 permanent member states in the Security Council of the United Nations. China is on the par with the United States militarily. And China is a larger economy than the US economy if we use purchasing power parity. And China is next only to the United States if we use official exchange rate. China today, in terms of its size of the economy, is more than 5 times that of India. This is the reality. However, please bear in mind, China has achieved all this transformation through peace, not occupying any single inch of foreign land, not occupying any foreign country. You talked about Taiwan. Read Indian government's position. Indian government recognizes and acknowledges there is only one China. Taiwan is part of China. That's the reality. Don't get that wrong. Look at China-Japan relations. Japan unconditionally surrendered to China and the United States and the former Soviet Union, signing an instrument of unconditional surrender. In that surrender, Japan undertook some commitments. You never want to allow Japan to renege their commitment signed into the instrument of the unconditional surrender. Otherwise, you take the risk of resurrecting the shadows of imperialism in Japan.
No, but now, Professor Gao, you're missing the point. The point being that there's only one country that seems to have a problem with its neighbors, or at least its neighbors seem to have a problem with it. I never hear of Indonesia complaining about Japanese high-handedness, or about Cambodia or Thailand complaining about South Korean high-handedness. Everybody is worried about Chinese hegemony. So then, who is the problem with?
I disagree. Allow me to tell you one simple truth. China has 14 land neighboring countries. China signed a border treaty with 12 of them, including Vietnam. China has a border treaty agreement with Vietnam. Only 2 countries have not signed border treaty with China. India, your great India, and Bhutan, which is controlled by India in terms of diplomacy and military.
Okay.
China has signed the border treaty with, among all the others, Russia. Do you hear any problem between China and Russia, which share border of 4,300 kilometers
that's only
long?
In the recent past. Historically, the Soviet Union and China never saw eye to eye. But be that as it may, that's not the point of tonight's debate. But